All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone from Kampala. Welcome, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. Where we're excited to share with you more about Rootical Business Builder and specifically Steward Ownership. That's a core part of our model. I won't give it away. We're going to tell you a bit about what Rootical is about in a few minutes. But yeah, I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for taking your time to join us this afternoon. So my name is Joakim Ewechu. I work with Shona. I lead our team at Shona. We are a business development support services company. We help entrepreneurs build successful businesses. We're based in Kampala, in Uganda, with experience working with entrepreneurs across the East African region, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda. We're excited to be one of the partners for Rootical. I'm excited to bring that to you today, alongside Hannes, who's joining our call, and Fresh Ventures, that's based in the Netherlands. Yeah, thank you for joining us today. So Hannes, if you help me with the slides, next slide. Before we start, just some housekeeping. Would want to utilize the chat for Q&A. So if you have any questions or comments, please utilize the chat for that. We've started already by introducing, by talking about where we're coming from. If you could all just, maybe tell us in one sentence what you do as well in the chat, that would be very helpful. Please keep your microphones on mute unless when we call on to you to present. If you can turn on your camera, that would be great, so that you can see the faces of everyone we're interacting with. It's okay if you're not able to. And then lastly, follow us on LinkedIn, Rootical, on Twitter, Rootical Builder, @Rootical Builder, and then our website, rootical.org. So we're excited about this webinar as one of our first events as we look to launch Rootical in the coming weeks. So thank you again for joining us. So I'll talk a bit about what we're planning to cover during our conversation today. We're going to have a welcome and introduction to Rootical Business Builder. And then we're going to introduce Steward Ownership, the movement and the principles behind it. We're going to talk a bit about the legal context and opportunities for steward ownership in Uganda. We're going to have an expert kind of present to us a perspective on steward ownership, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end of our call. Hannes, I think our screen, if you could please reshare that screen. Right, thank you for that. So before we get started, again, thank you all for joining our conversation today. I would also like to thank our panelists that are joining us today. That's Daria from Papas, Idlin, who's joining us, and then Daniel Hammer as well. Thank you very much for accepting to participate in this webinar. All right, so I'll hand over to Hannes, who will kick us off with introducing what Rootical is all about. Over to you, Hannes.
Yes, trying to unmute. Hi, everyone. Really good to be here with you today. Before we dive into the wonderful universe of steward ownership, we just wanted to also take this opportunity to present you Rootical Business Builder. Rootical has been in the making for the past 2 years. We are now fully funded and launching our pilots in Uganda as of next month. So we're super excited to officially kickstart our activities with this webinar today, and also engage in this conversation about steward ownership and what it could mean in the Ugandan entrepreneurial context. So Rootical is basically a startup studio, which means it's a structured process to build startups from scratch. And we want to enable Ugandan entrepreneurs, talents, potential founders of the companies we're going to build together, and aim for those companies to be designed in a way they can contribute to changing the food system and accelerating the transition to more healthy and regenerative and sustainable foods in Uganda and East Africa. So we started building Rootical from 3 key observations or problem statements. The first one is that 2/3 of lands, agricultural lands on the African continent is degraded, closely linked to the way our food is being produced, and agriculture has been industrialized and pressure, of course, on that land. The second is that today 3 billion people, including 3/4 of all Africans, cannot afford a healthy diet. No? So what can we do to change the food system to making healthy, nutritionally rich, diversified diets available and affordable to mainstream consumers in Uganda? That's another key question we want to work on. And then this is a famous figure by Oxfam: 1% in the world now owns more than the rest of us combined. No? Global wealth is increasing at rapid pace, but also concentrating ever more in the hands of the very few. No? And then, in our opinion, that's closely linked also to the way our economy is organized, the way our companies are financed and managed, and especially the way our food and agriculture system has been evolving over the past decades. And so with Rootical, we also want to change the way our food companies of the futures are financed, managed, and owned. And that's specifically what we'll talk about today with the steward ownership concept. So that brings us to the 3 key pillars of Rootical Business Builder. The first one is regenerative agriculture and agroecology as the best paradigms for our future food systems. If we want to work towards sustainable production of food to nourish the people, if we want to mitigate climate change, if we want to regenerate our farms, our landscapes, our communities, then this is the way forward. The second one is purpose-driven entrepreneurship, where we want to aim to build commercially viable businesses that can also be very impactful and cater to all. No? So making healthy and nutritious food available and affordable to all, rather than, for instance, exporting organic only to Europe as the end goal. And then the third principle, the third key pillar, is steward ownership, which is basically a way of locking the purpose of a company into its legal setup, and walking the talk on governance, finance, and impact investments, as well as avoiding mission drift. But our experts, Daria and Edlin, will tell us all about it after this short introduction. So what do we want to do with Rootical Business Builder? We want to gather a group of talented entrepreneurs and work with them all the way from an analysis of the food system to identify key challenges, up to defining solutions and developing businesses that can address those key challenges. And in doing so, we want to build steward-owned, regenerative agriculture and food startups that can help farmers to transition to regenerative agriculture or agroecology as a way of production. No? So we really focused on supporting farmers in that transition, and we will either do so by building businesses that provide solutions to those farmers in that transition, for instance, supplying biopesticides, providing solutions in transition finance mechanisms, insurance products, and so on the let's say the production side of things. or our businesses, our startups will provide a stable and growing market incentive to those farmers by buying their regenerative produce, for instance, as a regenerative consumer brand, marketplace mechanisms, and so on. No? So closely working with those farmers to support the transition to regenerative agriculture is at the heart of what we want to be doing in the coming years in Uganda.
Yeah. So the kind of entrepreneurs we're looking for 3 profiles of potential future founders to participate in the Rootical Business Builder, our startup studio. So the first is, like Rita, who an entrepreneur who started a food processing business but had to close after a few years. So a failing forward entrepreneur. Or John, a young graduate who has developed an amazing biopesticide solution that he wants to turn into a business. Or Harriet, who's a corporate with 9 years of corporate marketing experience and wants to become an entrepreneur. So these are the 3 high-level profiles of the type of people we're looking for. An entrepreneur who has started a business that has unfortunately had to close. A young graduate or entrepreneur who has a new idea or a solution that they have already tested, or a corporate that is looking to start a regenerative food business. Some of the qualities we're looking for in potential future founders is a strong entrepreneurial mindset, purpose-driven individuals who are passionate about regenerative agriculture, those who are eager to be trained food system changers, and individuals who are willing to reconsider their business ideas. This is in case they already had an idea or a solution. Those who are willing to reconsider these ideas based on shared learning and context analysis. Hannes? So our process for our startup studio, it's an 18-month process. So we plan to start with 40 potential founders. We're going to have an open call of applications in April, May, but spend the first 2 months doing a participatory problem analysis on the food systems or the food system in Uganda. So this will be done through a 2 weeks food system leadership program. And then following that, we will select 20 fellows that will proceed to the next stage, which is test the solutions phase, where we'll identify, test, and develop potential businesses from the ideas we've come up with. And we'll also do some training to build business skills and some training around regenerative agriculture. And then we'll also be training these founders through some human-centered design approaches and methods. And then following that, we'll select the top 18 fellows that we'll be investing in to build teams around the prioritized solutions we've identified from the initial process. And then we'll be doing some training on investment readiness, steward ownership, for these selected 18 fellows. And then following that, we'll go into what we're calling the co-founding stage, where we're aiming to start 5 to 6 regenerative agriculture businesses from the ideas that have been formed in the previous steps of the process. And in this co-founding stage, we'll be working with the founders to incorporate these businesses and then support them to achieve product market fit. We'll also be working with investors to provide initial investment into these businesses that have been formed, and we'll also be providing a small setup capital to these businesses as well. Following this process, we'll also be providing some services. So we'll be supporting the founders that we'll be working with at this stage to raise capital, connecting them to expertise, supporting them to build the team, and then we'll also be working with them to benefit from economies of scale maybe by collaborating with each other. We'll be connecting them to TRF and Shona networks, and also with Steward Ownership aligned investors. So that's our process that we'll be going through with potential founders that we select to be part of this experience.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joachim, for completing that introduction to Rootical. Again, welcome everyone. If you joined a bit later, we're now going to enter the discussion on steward ownership. We're going to start with Daria from the Purpose Economy organization. Check their website, purpose/economy.org, for more information after the webinar. There's a very rich amount of knowledge hosted there. Purpose Economy is basically leading the way for the steward ownership movement globally, and they're hyper experienced in building steward ownership companies, in adapting to the legal context, and also in investing in steward ownership and purpose-driven companies. So I'll give the mic to you, Daria, to introduce us into steward ownership.
Okay, thank you, Hannes. Hi, everybody. My name is Daria Urman, and I'm really pleased to be here and to have this chance to talk about steward ownership and share my views on that with you. And I'm gonna share my screen now, just a second. Okay, somehow. And just a moment. Okay, here it is. I hope you can see it now.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay, I'm gonna jump just directly into the topic because I have just 10 minutes and it's rather complicated. So, basically, when we speak about steward ownership, we have first to have a look at what corporate ownership generally is, and it's quite complicated as a concept, but on the other hand, it's really easy if we look at the rights that are connected to corporate ownership. So when we speak about corporate ownership, basically we always mean a bundle of different legal rights. And these are, on the one hand, the rights to extract economic value from the company. These are the dividend rights. This is the right to control the company using the voting rights. And also these are the rights to sell, to transfer, or to destroy the company. And usually all of those legal rights are bundled together and are not differentiated. So when I owe a company, I can say I'm the owner of the company. I will always have all of those, normally have all of those rights. But there is also a possibility to split these rights and to distribute them separately. And one specific way of doing so is basically steward ownership that we're going to talk today about. We started to work on this topic in Germany 2015, and we analyzed many companies that are steward owned that exist in the world, and we figured out that all of them, there's something common about them, and all of them enshrine two principles into their legal DNA, or let me say into their legal structure. And these principles are the principles of steward ownership. So let me please introduce you these principles. The first one is the principle of self-determination. And this basically means that we make sure that the control of the company is not a tradable commodity. This means that the steering wheel, so the majority of voting rights over the company, are always held by people who are really connected to the company, to its operation, to its mission and values. And the second principle is the principle saying that profits serve the purpose. So it means that steward-owned companies, they exist not for the sake of making money, but rather because they want to solve a problem in this world and deliver value to all of us, and that's the reason why they exist. So the profits, the profits can be there, but they are not just like that there for the shareholders, but they are there to serve this purpose. And they can be reinvested, they can be donated. Also, parts of them can be used to pay the investors. But that's basically it. That's the so-called asset lock. And well, actually, the idea of steward ownership is not that new, because there used to be steward-owned companies in the past. And as I said, we went through them and analyzed what the common things are about those companies. And good news that there are many, many, many examples in the world. These are just some examples. This is a small sample of what we found in the world. We have like companies like Zeiss producing microscopes in Germany. Like, you know, they started to do this 130 years ago, and this is a steward-owned company. We have Bosch. Probably all of you know Bosch, the technical company producing many gadgets and technical devices and washing machines and everything. We have IKEA here. We have Rolex, you know, the watches, Carlsberg, organically grown company from the States, Novo Nordisk from Denmark, and so on and so on. There are many, many, many of them. And there is one nice example that I'm gonna talk a bit more about. This is Patagonia. I'm pretty sure that many of you, or maybe most of you, know the company, producing outdoor clothing. And the story about it is that the company transitioned to steward ownership last year. And this is a real highlight and a lighthouse for us, because it's a great company that many people know. And the founder, his name is Yvon Chouinard, and his family, they own this company valued at $3 billion. And they transferred their ownership to a specially designed trust and nonprofit organization. And that was a kind of succession model they used. Instead of passing the shares directly to their children, which was not really an option for the children, they didn't want it. And instead of selling the company, they chose this to really ensure that the company remains mission-oriented and independent on the long term. And basically what we see here, well, I've been speaking about the rights, economic rights, voting rights that can be distributed differently. So what we see here is one example, and there can be different ways of implementing steward ownership, but this is one example showing the main principles, the main mechanics. What we see here is that we have on the one hand, this Patagonia Perpetual Purpose Trust. This is the trust where stewards of Patagonia are. Those people who have the voting rights of Patagonia, they can decide everything, but they cannot get dividend rights. So they have no financial motivation or incentive to maximize the shareholder value or the profits, because they get no profits from the company. They are the stewards. So they are committed to the mission and they take decisions. On the other hand, we have this Holdfast Collective, which is a charitable entity, a non-profit entity, which can get dividends from the company, but has no voting rights. So the company cannot use its force to maximize the profits. And like that, this structure ensures that the company preserves its independence and its mission, and the dividends go to climate protection and to the preservation of undeveloped land around the globe. And this is possible because of the separation of power and money. So we decouple power and money in the company. And this is a real paradigm shift, because what we see in the world today is that normally, because we have this bundle of rights connected to ownership, which are always distributed together, we have this paradigm of shareholders using his power or their voting right to maximize the profits. And we have now, with steward ownership, a shift from this old paradigm to a new paradigm saying, okay, we'll now have committed stewards, like stewards who are committed to the mission of the company, and a company that remains mission-driven and independent on the long term. So this is really nice, and that's a really amazing step by the founder of Patagonia, which changes a lot for Patagonia itself, but also like it makes a change for the role that Patagonia is going to play in the society. And if you're still not convinced yet, I'm going to talk a bit about the advantages of steward ownership, the effects of steward ownership, because we are lucky. the topic is pretty new, but there are already studies, really nice studies, especially based on the Danish market, but there are also some other studies showing that steward-owned companies have advantages over the other companies. The first one is that steward-owned companies, and in this case, these are foundation-owned companies because it's based on the Danish data, and those companies were analyzed, but it's the same. So those companies, they have higher survival probability during crisis. So steward-owned companies, they're more resistant during crisis because they look on long-term. They're not focused on short-term profits, they look long-term. And there is more data showing that those companies are profitable. So these are not like just poor companies donating everything. They are really profitable. They reinvest a lot. They do good business. Those companies pay really good wages. They have employees who are more intrinsically motivated about their job because they know, well, I'm working in this company and I'm working for a purpose, and I'm not working to increase the pocket of the shareholder of the company, of the owner of the company. So they are more motivated. There is higher employee retention rate, managers stay longer, less fluctuation, and those companies focus more on environment. Yeah, so these are the advantages. These are definitely making the topic worth looking at it. And I'll now tell a bit about us, like purpose as organization, and about the international movement. So yeah, we founded Purpose. The first organization was a foundation, Purpose Foundation. We founded it 2015, and we have since then supported many companies in Germany and worldwide in learning more about steward ownership and transitioning their companies into steward ownership. We have been supporting policymakers in Germany to make a legal form for steward ownership possible. So we're doing political work. We have been inspiring and enabling actors around the world, providing them with our materials. Like we have a lot of open source materials, case studies, workbooks, etc., that people can use. We've been supporting multiplier organizations, especially regional organizations that want to start something similar in different countries, providing them with experiences, resources, and network. And that's interesting because many things have happened since 2015. And yeah, we used to be really alone in this journey as a pioneer, 2015, but now I can show you this map, and I'm really proud because there are many points showing the international movement and its power, and it's growing more and more. There is a lot of interest for this topic in the world. We have a lot of requests from many companies from the world that want to transition to steward ownership, that see the advantages for them. We have requests from lawyers and tax advisors and policymakers who are interested in this topic, but also multiplier organizations and so on. And it's funny because if I showed you this map back 2015, there would have been just one small, lonely turquoise, like or the green point in Germany. And now I'm so proud that we have so many points there. And basically, I see there is a mistake because they used to. I'm wondering why Uganda is not mentioned there. That's not updated yet. Of course, there should be a point for Uganda as well. And I'm happy to know that so many things are happening there as well. Yeah, and to sum up, I believe that steward ownership is a really interesting alternative to traditional corporate structures, based not on maximization of shareholder value, but on the purpose and independence of the companies. And I believe that setting up a legal and financing structure that is aligned with the company that you want to build and with the mission that you want to bring to the world can have a really great impact on your individual company, but also, like, if we think it's really bigger for the whole society, for countries, it definitely will have impact on many stakeholders, different stakeholders, and on the society as a whole. And that's why I'd like to encourage you to join this journey, to go further in it and explore the options, how this could work for you and how this could work in Uganda. Yeah, thank you for your attention. And if you want to discover more, as Hannes mentioned, you can check our website. We have some booklets, for instance, this one in English, but also some other materials in English as well. Yeah, thank you. And if you have questions, I'm pretty happy to ask or to answer.
Thank you, Daria, for that great introduction to steward ownership. We have one question for now, a rather tricky one. If you know of some existing steward-owned companies in East Africa, myself, I don't. That's also one of the reasons, of course, we're kickstarting this conversation on steward ownership today. Because we've seen quite some mission drift occurring, no? Important companies with a impact first orientation seemingly that diluted their ownership rights and mission as they raised more capital. I won't call any names, but yeah, did you hear of any companies in the area working on this, except for Rootical?
Yeah, that's definitely, like, we have been receiving requests from Africa as well, and also a couple of requests from Kenya, for instance. But indeed, those, like, it stopped at a certain point, and because it's always tricky and difficult to start something new in this direction in a new country. So people can use our experience, but it's like, it's not such a trivial and obvious task just to copy paste, because you have different legal structures in countries. And indeed, things that are happening around Rootical and with Rootical in Uganda are the ones that are the most prominent right now for East Africa, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I also know of a fund that is very active, only focused actually on East Africa. It's UK based, but they also have Kenyan and Ugandan entities, and they are also redefining their structure along or according to steward ownership. They're actually already foundation owned, so they're well on that way. So yeah, things are starting to move slowly, and we hope to give a push in that direction. So two more questions coming in. Stacy, I saw you raising your hand. Please put your question in the chat. If you want to grab the mic, we can do that later in the webinar. So another question. Yeah, I would love to hear more about raising funding for steward-owned organizations. Would this be more challenging in your opinion?
Okay, great question. One of the key questions that we always hear, obviously, because ownership structures are always connected with the question of financing. And indeed, I'd say it is more tricky because the topic is less known. Let me speak for Europe, for instance. Of course, it's less known and it's a bit more tricky, and you have to kind of talk to investors and explain them the topic. But we see many things are changing, and many more investors are getting acquainted with it and realize, okay, we do want to get real impact. We do not want to invest money just somewhere. And we realize that we cannot have enough impact if we just take any startup that is impact oriented. But if there is an exit, then there is a drift from the mission. So there is no long-term impact. And they realized that using steward ownership, there is a possibility for a mission lock-in. And that's why more and more investors are joining this movement. So it's getting easier. On the other hand, there's a really important point that I want to mention and underline. There is a kind of idea in the world, especially in the Western world, that it's easy to get money, or like there is a paradigm of how you get money. You make a startup, you get venture capital money and so on, and this is the way. There's a kind of, like, you know, fixed picture that this is the way how you build startups, but that's not true. Actually, when you look at how many startups are getting this kind of money, not so many of them are doing this. So there is a huge need, even without steward ownership, there is a huge need for alternative finance models for startups that see normal venture capital funding is not compatible with what we are doing. So this topic is also a bit broad, and I think there is a lot of work to be done in terms of developing of this whole area of alternative financing, which is overlapping with steward ownership.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I think you might not attract certain investors, but that may be also not the capital that will be able to accompany in your long-term pursuit of your mission, right? And we've been discussing extensively with Joachim about this, that yeah, a lot of East African agriculture and food companies, they are not capable of following this venture capital hockey stick kind of growth curve with exponential growth, but they're rather slowly, steadily growing SMEs, and they need different financial solutions, and also different types of investors and different types of capital. And we believe that steward ownership can actually be an asset to attract that kind of companies, of investors, because you're actually giving a very clear sign about how serious you are about the pursuit of your purpose and mission as a company.
Hannes, I'd like to say, to mention one thing. For that, we use the word, the notion of catalysator for truth, because it's like when you speak to investors about what your intentions are, and you're really serious about your idea and your vision for the company and its corporate structure, you kind of split, separate investors who you check for truth, you check for, like, you do not get those who are not aligned with you, you get just those who are aligned with what you are wanting to do. And that's important. I think that's a good test.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna send one more question your way, and then we will take the rest later on in the webinar. What is the, let me check which one I'll take. Have any clear challenges specific to steward-owned organizations emerged yet, coming from steward ownership?
Well, one of the challenges is that you probably have to explain a bit more to your investors when you're getting funding. But this, as I said, things are changing. For instance, in Germany, where we've been working for a couple of years, it's like much more investors know the notion, understand what it is, and like they've heard about it somewhere. So it's changing, but funding, because it's a bit different, could be a topic. And another thing is what we are dealing with right now is governmental grants and programs where you get, as a startup, you get funding from the state, from the government. So sometimes there are some limitations because many of those programs, for instance, in Europe, are done for just absolutely traditional exit-oriented startups. And when we are currently talking to the ministries in Germany, trying to explain them, come on, guys, you want to have really nice companies in Germany, so you have to work with not exit-oriented startups as well. So this is a topic, how you change those programs in a way that those startups can also get those funding.
Yeah, thank you, Daria. That's actually a great bridge to our next speaker, Edlin Murungi. She's a lawyer in Uganda, and she's been working with us over the past months to analyze the specific legal context applicable in Uganda, in which we'll be building steward-owned companies. And she's happy to share the results of her study with us today. So let's now move to you, Edlin. Again, keep the questions coming. We'll have a bit more time later.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you. I'm going to just be piggybacking from what Daria has been presenting and just move to the Ugandan context. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, I hope so. Okay, so like Daria mentioned, the main principles that we are looking at for steward ownership are self-determination and profit serving a purpose. And if you look at the traditional model of corporate companies, it is that the owners, or quote unquote in the Ugandan context, the shareholders, have the right to determine if a dividend is made, if shares are transferred, or if there is transmission of shares. So if you look at the traditional sense of how corporate structures would look like, you might find difficulty in understanding how steward ownership would work. And so I'm going to just provide an overview of what we're going to look at. We're going to generally look at the legal and physical framework of how steward ownership might look like in Uganda. Like they mentioned, I also do not know a company that is running on this model yet, but there could be companies that are not that have not made themselves public or that we do not know about. And then we're going to look at the potential structures given the Ugandan legal entities, so companies, trusts, cooperative societies, and hybrid models. Then we'll look at the recommendations on what, thinking innovatively, how we could structure a steward-owned entity under the current laws without anything changing. And specifically, we'll look at some of the legal considerations, and then we'll see opportunities and barriers, and maybe we'll look at sample structures. So if you look at the legal and physical, this is basically the law and then the tax structures. So some of the reasons of why people create companies the way they do is because of what the law says and what tax benefits they're going to get from particularly looking at those specific structures. Now, let's go into a bit of, I'm trying to be real quick because I just have 10 minutes and I want to be within time. So if you look at the vehicles that we have currently under the companies, we have companies limited by shares, we have companies limited by guarantee without a share capital, and then we have companies limited by guarantee with a share capital. Now, the commonest model is the private companies limited by share. And those are mostly what businesses use because they are created in such a model that once you create such a company, you are profit-oriented. They're the commonest venture for profit-oriented people. And you remember at the core of steward-owned companies, they are still looking to make a profit. So if you look at the models that we have, a private company limited by share would be a model that is available for them. However, we do have other entities within the legal framework. We have companies limited by limited by guarantee without a share capital and with a share capital. So those are also different companies. Now, companies limited by guarantee at their core are ideally supposed to be used for non-profit oriented business. Usually that is the core. However, when they introduced company limited by guarantee with a share capital, we see that they bring in the option of having a company limited by guarantee, but still having a share capital. So the share capital component works to provide sort of for-profit entities to also take up this model. And then we're going to look at the trusts. So Daria mentioned several, I think the model that the example that she gave was a trust. So the situation with the Ugandan legal entities that the law provides for public trusts, and these are usually used in land structures. However, you can create a private trust and then register that as a public document. Now, the challenge with that is that there is no legal framework in terms of private trusts for you to consider as a model. So it would be very challenging in terms of what model are you going to follow under the company's law? There's no specific law if you're dealing with a private trust. And the law that we have provides for public trusts, which would not be an ideal model. So that's sort of, you can use trusts to sort of create a steward-owned company, but it would be very challenging in terms of how do you report, how do you quote unquote separate stewards from the economic rights, from the voting rights, from the dividend rights. It would become very challenging and complicated given the structure of Ugandan law. And then we have hybrid models. Now, hybrid models, I think this has also been an onset given that we are moving towards social enterprises or companies that have a social mission to them. And the hybrid models are where you see non-profits, a form where you combine both non-profits and for-profit entities. So you can find a for-profit entity owning a non-profit or a non-profit owning a for-profit entities. Now, this model would have been very ideal, and it can actually still be very ideal, where you have a company limited by guarantee owning a company limited by shares, but that's only if you stop at the company being at it being a company limited by guarantee. And so we look at the downsides of some of the hybrid models where the non-profit entity that you're using is an NGO. Now, before 2016, the NGO law was very, quote unquote, quite more liberal. And since after 2016, after the amendments, the NGO law is very cumbersome. It's very strict. The NGO Bureau is very strict. And the understanding of how NGOs work, or sorry, I think I missed out this slide, but let me just finish up this one. And how the NGOs are supervised is very strict. So one of the things is that NGOs are supposed to, they cannot make a profit. And if they do, then that has to be for the purpose of the NGO specifically. So it becomes very complicated for reporting purposes when you have an NGO that is owning the company, the steward-owned company. And so this model could also be available, but we would also recommend that it's not the best available model because of the reporting requirements and how NGOs are highly policed, and the fact that primarily you cannot make profits. So it would be very complicated for investors as well. Now, cooperatives is the other model, but the challenge with cooperatives are, one, the numbers. There are specific numbers of how many people you
Edlin dropped for a minute. Let's see if she comes back. We can't hear you, Edlin. Let's just give her some seconds.
And maybe we could take another question on steward ownership as we wait for Edmund to come back.
Yeah, good points. Things got very technical very quickly, so I hope you're all still with us. In short, I think what I've learned from this study is that both the trust, the cooperative, and the NGO model in the legal context of Uganda wouldn't be very helpful to explore, but that actually a combination of limited liability companies guaranteed by shares or guaranteed, what's the other one? Limited by guarantee, sorry, would be very feasible and very accessible way, let's say, of setting up steward ownership companies without too many complications. Also, just want to mention for all of you that we're going to share the report with you in the coming days. We're still finalizing some visual details, but yeah, all the people that registered for the webinar will be receiving a copy of the study that we conducted with Edlin, who seems to be back.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry. Third world country problems. So the recommendation that we made, I think they've mentioned a bit about the report, is that the model would be a company having various models. So a company limited by shares, run by stewards with majority ownership of another company limited by guarantee. And there would be a golden share model. Now, these things are very high level, and apologies. Yes, this one. And so would look at the under the legal considerations, would look at what does the law currently offer that we can use, given the fact that we do not have a specific law for quote unquote steward ownership, or a specific law that covers social enterprises. So we would look at, does the law create any restrictions on shares being transmitted? Does the law provide for a company having various classes of shares? Does the law provide for who can hold steward shares? Can you have voting rights but do not have dividend rights? So those are things we'd be looking at. Does the law have restrictions on transmission? And then how will you structure tax in terms of transferring either steward shares or the golden share? What would be the tax obligations? So those are all the things that we looked at in arriving at this specific model. And some of the opportunities and barriers that we found was that in terms of opportunities, it's the area is new. And so we have the opportunity to shape how it looks like. We have the opportunity to be creative using the existing legal steward ownership principles. And also the other opportunities that under the company limited by the usual company of private company limited by shares, it's very open on how you can structure your company. You can do almost anything that you want because the law is very, very open. The barriers is that we do not have a specific law that governs this specific area or that is unique to social enterprises. And we've seen countries creating these specific laws, but we've not reached there yet. And also the other challenge is that because we lack an elaborate law on things like trusts and foundations, and the NGO law is also very restrictive, we find ourselves being limited to the model of either the private company limited by guarantee or the private company limited by shares. So we sort of have to be creative within the company model structure. So some of and one of the last things that we looked at is how a model memorandum and articles of association would look like. And I think there was a specific question on what happens to investors, how will investors get buy-in and things like that. So if you look at articles of associations of most companies, so these are the things that we would be changing. So for example, the business purpose, we would specifically have steward ownership as a purpose, and the fact that that cannot be changed or things like that. Then if we look at share variation, we would have the steward owned shares as a class. We would have the class of the golden share that have veto rights as a class. And then we would have the preference shares, the ones that have economic rights as a class. So under there, we would have founders, and then we'd have also investors. So investors would still be able to have buy-in into your company, but they would be limited to a specific class of shares. And we also looked at all these other things that a company considers. So some of the sample structures that we looked at when we are considering is for who can have preferential economic shares be issued to. So here the company would specifically look at founders, employees, charitable organizations, and so the company to have the quote unquote mission lock-in, you would say that these are the people or these are the classes of people who would own these specific shares. And then the other issue is that you would create multiple classes of shares so that you're able to cover both the founders and the investors, but at the same time cover employees, charitable organizations, and have the mission lock-in. And then for dividends, you would look at either redemption or things like that to also cover the fact that profits must serve a purpose within that particular company. And this is one of the structures that we would be looking at under the current Ugandan legal system. Still looks a bit complicated on paper, but it covers tries to hit all the heads, while bringing in this principle. So in conclusion, similar to many social entrepreneurship models that are coming up, we do not have the exact legal framework for steward ownership. However, we can be creative and innovative within the existing framework. And the corporate DNA can change because the Ugandan context creates very flexible avenues to have that changed. And apologies for falling off for a few minutes. I think now I'll take some questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Edeline. Just maybe a first question would be to clarify the golden share model.
Okay, so the reason why I went straight in, I thought maybe Daria would have covered the models specifically, but there are various models in steward ownership that are considered. And the reason why we just zeroed down on this one and why I specifically presented on this one, it's because it was the most ideal. The other models could still be used, but it's the most ideal given the current limitations we have within the law. And I would have to, I think I'll just stop sharing my screen. And so the steward-owned model is really on it divides the company into three. The reason why they say there's a golden share is because the golden share is the share that has the power to veto when a company is being sold, or if there's, in the event that the company is being sold or majority of the company is being taken over by an entity. And the people or the entity that has the right to that golden share would veto any vote where the company is going to sort of go away from its mission that it was specifically intended for. Yeah. And then it would still be divided into the shares, the other shares that Daria was speaking about, where there would be entities or people that have the voting, the economic rights, and also those are the voting rights and also the rights to dividends. So the golden share model is such that there are stewards, there are people, there are stewards, two, there are people who still have a right to dividends, and those could be maybe investors or founders and things like that. But also there is a golden shareholder who has the right to veto any vote on a sale or if the mission of the company is changing.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
yeah.
So that's the purpose lock-in we have been talking about, no?
Yeah, that's the purpose lock-in we've been talking about.
Usually that golden share is owned by third-party organizations that are also steward-owned, and they don't only have the right, they actually have the legal obligation to veto any of those changes that would go against the purpose and the setup of the company. All right, thank you, Adeline. For the to keep time, we have to move on. But thanks a lot for your contribution. We got technically quite quickly, but while you dropped off, I was resuming the study in one sentence, basically saying that yeah, not all models are the best in Ugandan context, but there are good opportunities to quite easily set up a steward-owned company in Uganda with the companies limited by share and by guarantee. So thanks a lot also for the extensive research and study you've been doing. So then we'll move to Daniel Hama. Daniel is a Ugandan business consultant and an entrepreneur who's been also very keen on kickstarting steward ownership movement in Uganda. He was even part of a steward ownership conference in Berlin last year, organized by Purpose. So yeah, Daniel, we'll have you for a quick comment on why you think steward ownership is is so important for Uganda.
Thank you so much, Hannes, and Rootical for putting this together. Can you hear me though?
I think we do, yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Yes, some things do get technical very quickly, like you said. I have been looking into this and asking the questions which Edline has been answering, which have been very helpful. Thank you so much for the previous speakers. I am a business consultant. My name is Daniel Hammer. I have been doing business consultancy for about 7 years now. And during that time, a lot of people have raised a lot of issues that end up sort of pointing towards steward ownership. I believe that it's a solution that many Ugandan companies need to look into, but before they can, they need to understand it. Now, as a consultant, I do not have the luxury to explain things technically. I have to break them down really, really simply, which is what I'm going to try to attempt to do to make it sound more relevant by giving some contextual examples. I want to give the example of, and this is hypothetical, it's not something that has actually happened, but it would be the kind of example that you'd see many times over in Uganda. Let's say that you're working in a job, maybe a government job, and you're earning some good money, and you wanted to do something entrepreneurial to help your family. So you decided to, let's say, open up a restaurant. Let's say it cost you about 50 million shillings. What would you need to do to open up a restaurant? You need, well, apart from the capital, you need, in terms of your personnel, 2 types of people. You need a chef and you need a manager, okay? I'm trying to make this really simple. Just stay with me. So what happens is, as time goes on, your manager and your chef may not necessarily be committed. They may not show the kind of commitment that you would like them to show. This happens a lot in Uganda. People call me in and say, my company is not performing. I realize there are challenges with the staff. They're not motivated. Sometimes they spend some time outside work, trying to set up their own businesses. And so the idea comes up, what if they own shares in this business? The owner will begin to suggest, what if I could make them interested and have a stake in what this business is actually doing? So every time there is an increase in the profits, they do share it, okay? So that is sort of the beginning of the conversation about steward ownership. As Edwin has explained, there are legal implications that need to be looked into. That I don't want to get back into, but because I think so. What happens is that to have these kinds of things set up where staff actually own shares. I'm putting it really own shares. As the company begins to grow, you'll keep those people who are highly talented, okay? If at some point you realize you're growing a little older and your children are not able to keep the company because they lack the skills that you have as an entrepreneur, you're able to have them keep some shares, which is what many companies have done, like Bosch and Rolex, as Daria was explaining earlier. So once your talented people are actually staked, okay, as shareholders. Now, there are different models that could be used, as Edwin was explaining. Some of them, you want to make sure that they maintain shares for as long as they are employees. That means that as they transition out, okay, one of the models could be as they transition out, they actually have other people come in and own shares, okay? The people who are coming in as new employees can actually own the shares in the company. So that has many advantages. I don't want to get into all of them because they have been covered and I've been given a few minutes to explain. So I wanted to say it very simply, say it in a Ugandan way. And I believe that as I speak, all of you are listening and you're thinking, yes, that actually does make sense because it establishes continuity. Your company could last for 1,000 years on that model. I think that's the biggest advantage. It also I'll just mention one more advantage. It prevents people who are what you'd call far-flung investors who are coming in from abroad. Let's say someone has big money from China, forgive me for using that example, comes in and says, well, I want to buy out this company. It's doing really well. They can't. Why? Because your people are actually staked in it. So it remains in Ugandan hands. I think that those are issues which we desperately need in this country, looking at the future, where we are headed, where the global economic institutions of the world are headed. How do we protect Ugandan businesses? How do we protect our environment? How do we protect the interests of our workers? It covers many of those areas. So in a few words, thank you, Hannes.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I really want to highlight what you said. It's also a slide shared by Daria on the longevity of steward-owned companies. No, the graph we've seen shows that steward-owned companies are 6 times more likely to celebrate their 40th birthday. It's about 60% of steward-owned companies making it to their 40th birthday, against only 10% of typically venture capital-owned companies. So that's a huge difference, no? And so as you explained very practically, Daniel, steward ownership is a way of leaving a legacy, no? It's a way of leaving a company to keep on making impact long after you're gone. It's also a way of involving employees, having them become part of decision making, having them share in profits, and as such, always increase their belonging to the organization and their satisfaction, their motivation, even their productivity, and so on. So very thankful for your contribution, Daniel. So we have about 20 minutes left in our webinar today. We can take some questions from the floor. If you want to really contribute by unmuting, you can do so now. We'll allow our panelists to reflect on the questions coming up. If you want to contribute by unmuting, please raise your hand. First, I'll take a few more questions we had in the chat for anyone that wants to react. But actually, I had to say one more thing. So we had also invited back from Fresh Venture Studio. Fresh Venture is our sister in the Netherlands. They're basically running this a very similar kind of startup studio concept to building steward-owned ventures designed, to contribute to changing the food system. But Bart had to apologize for medical reasons today. So fortunately, he won't be with us. Just wanted you to know that Fresh Venture Studio is our sister in this adventure. They actually have been running their first cohort already, so they're 2 years ahead of us in terms of experience and doing, and so we'll be able to learn a lot alongside the way with them as our knowledge partner. So unfortunately, Bart is not here, but he's with us in this process. So as I said, we're moving to the questions and panel discussion. Maybe a first interesting question. Daria, maybe you could take it. What is the difference between steward ownership and the B corporations, the B Corps?
Okay, good question. Thank you for the question. The difference is that when we are speaking about steward ownership, we are not describing what the mission and the impact of the company should be, how sustainable it should be, and so on. We are rather speaking about the ownership structure and governance structure, helping the company focus on its mission. And normally there is a link between those people who are like thinking of alternative structures and people who look for sustainable economic models and for sustainable products. These are kind of most normally the same people. So we are looking at the structures and not at the products or at the way the products are produced, because we think that if you look at the structure, you have a great chance of having great products at the end and a mission which is really sustainable on the long term. And the second point is that B Corps is something where you can get a certification and you can also lose it. With steward ownership, in the way how we implement it, the big difference is that once you've chosen this model and you've done some, for instance, this golden share model, you have no chance of changing. For instance, you built a company and you say, okay, this is nice, I'm doing this. And you've run a company in a way that it's become really, really big, like worth like Patagonia. And imagine you have those principles in your articles of association, so it's done. But you've slept badly, or your wife is telling you, okay, you have to sell the company. We want really a lot of money on our bank account. So you can change the articles of association and remove all the principles of steward ownership from it. And then you'll make an exit, sell the company to Chinese funds or something like that. And that's done. And this is not possible with such golden share models and with normally with other steward ownership models as well, in a way that it's legally binding. So that's very different to B Corps. This is not legally binding.
Yeah, thanks Mita also for sharing the definition of B Corps in the chat. For those of you who don't know B Corps, it's basically a kind of label, let's say, for companies that are all about making impact. But I would say steward ownership goes a bit further and pushes that discussion to the actual pillars of an organization, no? Ownership and governance, and intervenes on that level, as Daria explained. Thanks a lot, Daria. Maybe 2 questions we can take together. Someone asking, is steward ownership going to work for corporations, cooperatives only? Thank you, Harriet, for that question. And maybe we can link it to the next question. How relevant is steward ownership for SMEs in Uganda? No, are we not making things too complex if it's basically the founder of that company steering the company and its purpose? Yeah, anyone can react. Joachim, also feel free to share your thoughts, yeah, keep the questions coming in. Let's go. Who would like to comment to this? Is it for big corporations only, and how relevant is steward ownership for smaller SMEs?
I can start if
sure.
Okay, and you can add, guys. So I would say that it's relevant for all corporations, because we've seen many times how startups have been, small companies, startups have been founded, and founders didn't ask themselves any questions about the corporate structure. They just got money from investors. They had a really complicated cap table with investors having minority rights and blocking provisions and everything, in a way that this founder himself had no power to really control his company, and he lost the control, or she lost the control. And it was difficult to rescue this company in the future, because such companies, because like it's up to negotiation. Sometimes we had luck with this, but sometimes the investors could say, okay, no, we will not going to sell our shares and empower or let the founders transition to steward ownership. So if you kind of lose the moment where it's possible to transition, then it can be tricky in the future. Regarding the question of, okay, what is about small companies that's not gonna grow and will always remain small? Okay, you could say the founder and his family, like he could transition further and further, and everything remains in the family, like family business. So no mission drift probably. On the other hand, you have succession question here. That's something we see more and more, that children have this burden to take over from the parents, and sometimes they just want to do something else in their lives, and not to have the feeling I have to take over the company. So you need to look for other models how to succession. See this Patagonia case, but there are many of them. And the other question is like, yeah, people are changing, right? So you can be a founder with nice mission, but who knows what happens to you and your ideas in 40 years, 50 years. So this is a way to say, okay, I believe in this mission, and I make all this legally binding to kind of, protect the business from future me, maybe seeing things differently, or just looking for money or wherever. And it's also a promise that you give to your customers, and that you can communicate, okay, we are a purpose-driven company, it's legally binding, even if we are small. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to add, for Rootical, of course, our aim is to design and build businesses together that are geared to change the food system. So we will look for those steadily but realistic growth paths of those businesses. And I mean, from the start in our studio, we will already have multiple co-founders, including the studio, including the participants that go through our program and build the ventures with us. So I think there, even when starting small, we're aiming to grow big and impactful. And Steward Ownership is probably a very good model to align the incentives and ownership models with our purpose from the start. Anyone else wants to react to this discussion? Otherwise, I'll go with the next question. Thanks, Daria. You of course, you had more time to think about this than us in practice. So thanks a lot for your contribution. There may be a question for our Ugandan panel members and anyone who wants to react. What are the behaviors of entrepreneurs in this ecosystem that might pose a challenge for Steward's ownership structure? The question from Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. So yeah, we're talking more about characteristics and behaviors of our Ugandan entrepreneurs that might actually be difficult to work with Steward Ownership.
Okay, I think that was a question directed towards me. I am having some trouble with hearing, so I'm not already sure that you can hear me quite well. Kindly confirm you can. Okay. So thank you for the question. The behaviors that make steward ownership challenging. I think that what comes to my mind is, I think the most pronounced one would be lack of knowledge about the options, to the extent that it isn't even reflected in our law, in our legal system. So let me just rewind a bit. I want you to think about where we got the idea about businesses, how they are set up. Where did we get the idea about limited liability companies, about company limited by guarantee? These are ideas that exist, that we got from common law, right? They came with the British. The challenge is that if you look at what we were doing previously, before we set up those kinds of legal systems, we had something that was closer to what we are talking about right now, steward ownership. In some sense, we have been, let me use the word brainwashed. It sounds a little harsh, okay? But I think that when you talk to the entrepreneurs today, they will speak about the parameters of business in a legal sense that exist on paper. What does the law allow? We are not being creative about how can we actually expand our legal frameworks in order to accommodate better systems where we can actually have the employees actually own shares, maybe for a time, for a certain duration, okay? While they are still employees in the company. When they exit outside, they leave their shares behind. How about a system like that? What are the ways that we can structure it? So entrepreneurs are meant to be creative people. They're meant to be problem solvers. But unfortunately, they're not thinking outside the box on this particular issue. So I feel like for me, the primary problem is that they are restricted to the legal systems, the legal infrastructure that exists currently. I think that it would be great if there was a community of entrepreneurs that understood these concepts, that was speaking to the MPs. Our MPs are available, and said, you know, give us better laws that are more accommodating to these ideas. As Evelyn spoke already, the law is quite restrictive and doesn't allow them the flexibility for better ownership mechanisms. I hope I've answered.
Thanks, thanks, Daniel. Yeah. Thanks. We heard you loud and clear. And just to add, I think Rootical is as an ecosystem builder definitely wants to be part of building that community of informed and steward ownership aligned entrepreneurs in Uganda. Together with Shona, of course. I think we can take one more question and then we'll go to Joachim again for closing our webinar today. Interesting question popped up in the chats. a scenario. No, imagine I'm a founder of a highly mission-driven company. At the same time, I put all my savings into this, taking a huge risk, and I have young children whom I want to secure the future for. How can these needs, concerns be taken care of with a steward-owned company? I'm sure they can be perfectly taken care of, but I'll let you guys answer. I hope this is
Daria, could you?
Most of you. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. This is a very typical question, of course, because most founders work hard on their baby, on their startup, on their company, and often do not extract any, get any salaries at the beginning, and are going at all the risks and so on, and want to have some pension in the future and stuff like that. So it's obvious; those needs are obvious. What we usually say is there is an absolute reason for this demand from the founders, and when we elaborate a specific model for a specific company, then we define something what we call founder compensation, because we say this is exactly the reason, as stated in the question. The founder needs some compensation for the first years of the startup. So we would define an amount that the founder would define an amount that he would get or she would get in the future from the company, from the cash flows of the company. And this can be a big sum, a very big sum, but normally this is a capped sum, and the company has to be able to pay this sum. It's not like a speculation on the future value of the company and getting money from an exit, but it's rather kind of also redemption of shares. The company is buying back the founder shares, but there could be some other models to provide the founder with liquidity. And once the founder is not there anymore, those shares are liquidated. So all future generations of successors who will be the stewards of the company, they are not having the same risks, right? So they can pay themselves really good salaries in the company, but they will not have the chance to get a big compensation for the first years, because they were not having the same risks. Yeah. And there is no rule to say, okay, this or that is the amount that the founders will get. It depends on the founders, it depends on the companies. We've been having examples with founders saying, I do not need anything, not just a cent. And we've had founders who say, okay, I'm coming from a poor family, I have nothing, I have no house, nothing. I'm renting a house, I have kids, I need something for the future. And that's a different need that we try to consider.
Yeah, thank you, Daria. And it's exactly the founders defining those rules, no? Of course, looking at steward ownership principles, but there's a lot of freedom to define these amounts and mechanisms that you'll use for your steward-owned company. All right, I think we're coming to an end. I see Joel or Gemma's question, whether a company, steward company or a trust incorporated abroad would be able to represent an entrepreneur's interests in a Ugandan company if the local laws don't support doing so. I think very quickly, this is a question we've also discussed with Edlin. Of course, the steward owner company or the golden share owning company in a steward-owned setup could be foreign. There is no real issue with that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Edlin, but I want to...
No, you're correct.
Exactly.
The steward, the company holding the shares can either be a local company or a foreign company.
Exactly.
Or a foreign entity, for that matter, if it's not a company.
Yeah, great. Okay, so thanks to all of you for those questions and this interesting conversation. We're running out of time, so back to you, Joachim.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daria, Edlin, and Daniel, for joining us for this discussion today and for sharing with us your wisdom on this topic. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My biggest takeaway around steward ownership, it's a form of ownership that presents an opportunity to preserve purpose by separating the voting or decision rights and dividend rights in a business. Steward-owned companies, you have the purpose is reserved. They're more resistant during a crisis. They're profitable. They last longer. They lead to better wages for employees. They lead to more motivated entrepreneurs. And they last longer. So it is a revolutionary model that has the opportunity and potential to help us reimagine and rebuild capitalism. So I'm really excited about this model. So thank you very much for breaking this down for us. For all of you that have joined us, we're going to be sharing the report that we worked on, and we'll also be sharing the book from Purpose as well attached to that. Thank you, Daria, for sharing that link. Otherwise, thank you all very much. Like we said, we're going to be launching Rootical in a few weeks, and we will be sending you all a note when we're making our announcement to launch Rootical. So thank you all very much. Have a good evening, good afternoon, and good evening. Bye.